My beloved child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was not meant to pass you by. Something has been waiting for you in the silence, something written not only with ink, but with regret, longing, and the kind of love that a person understands only when they fear they may have lost it forever. Do not rush away from these words. Do not let the noise around you steal this moment, because heaven has drawn you here for a reason. There is a letter carrying your name in the heart of the one you love, and although your hands may not have touched it yet, your soul has already felt its weight. That heaviness you could not explain, that sudden memory, that ache appearing without warning, it was not meaningless. Somewhere in the quiet, your soulmate finally wrote the words they were too afraid to speak aloud. For a long time, they believed silence would protect them. They thought keeping their feelings hidden would prevent everything from becoming more complicated. They convinced themselves that distance was safer than honesty, that pretending not to care would hurt less than admitting how deeply they had already fallen. Yet every day they stayed quiet, something inside them grew louder. Your name returned in unexpected moments. Your face appeared in their mind when rooms became empty. The sound of your voice followed them into the night, and memories they had tried to bury began rising one by one. They could distract themselves in daylight, but darkness removed every place they had used to hide. And last night, when the world became still, they reached for a blank page because their heart could no longer carry what their lips had refused to confess. But this was not an ordinary letter. They did not begin it with confidence. Their hand trembled before the first word was written. Several pages were started and torn apart. Some sentences were crossed out because they sounded too cold. Others were erased because they revealed too much. They wanted to tell you the truth, but the truth frightened them. They wanted to ask you to stay, yet they believed they had no right to ask anything of you. So they sat there between hope and surrender, staring at the empty space as though it were a mirror showing them every moment they had failed to choose courage. You need to understand something before the words of that letter are revealed. Your soulmate did not write it because they suddenly stopped loving you. They wrote it because they have been loving you in a way that has become unbearable to hide. The phrase, final letter, may sound like an ending, but heaven asks you not to decide what it means before you hear what came from their heart. There are endings that close doors, and there are endings that close old versions of people. There are goodbyes spoken to love, and there are goodbyes spoken to fear. What they wrote carries both sorrow and possibility, and the difference between them rests inside one truth they have not yet been brave enough to place directly into your hands. You have often wondered whether you imagined the connection. You questioned whether the moments between you meant as much to them as they meant to you. You replayed conversations, searching for hidden meaning in pauses, glances, and words left unfinished. There were days when you felt certain they cared, followed by days when their distance made you doubt everything. This confusion was not created because your intuition failed you. It was created because their behavior contradicted their heart. Their soul moved toward you while their fear pulled them away. They offered warmth, then disappeared. They opened one door, then locked another. And each time you attempted to understand, you were left carrying questions they should have answered. Heaven saw what that uncertainty did to you. It saw the nights when you wanted to reach out but stopped yourself because you feared being ignored. It saw the messages you typed and deleted. It saw the way you defended them in your heart even when their silence wounded you. You tried to believe there was a reason behind their behavior, yet you also wondered whether believing in that reason was simply another way of avoiding the truth. You did not want to chase someone who could not choose you, but you also could not deny that something about this connection felt unfinished. That unfinished feeling is what followed your soulmate to the page last night. They realized that no matter how far they tried to move, some part of them remained standing in the last place where they left you waiting. They saw, perhaps for the first time, the emotional cost of their hesitation. They remembered the softness you offered when they were guarded. They remembered how you noticed the sadness behind their smile. They remembered the way you stayed gentle when they became distant, and suddenly they understood that your patience had never been weakness. It had been love. A love they received without fully honoring. A love they felt, depended upon, and then frightened away because they did not know how to hold something so real. The first line they finally kept was simple. It did not contain a grand declaration. It did not attempt to impress you. It said, "I do not know whether I still have the right to speak to your heart." After writing that sentence, they stopped. They stared at it for a long time, because those words contained the fear that had been haunting them. They were not only afraid you had moved on. They were afraid you had healed enough to see them differently. They feared that the version of you who once waited may no longer exist, and deep within them, they knew they could not blame you if that were true. Then came the second line, and this was where the letter began to break open. I mistook your love for something that would always remain, even if I gave it nothing to hold on to. Your soulmate admitted that they became comfortable with your presence without becoming responsible for your heart. They believed you would understand every silence. They assumed you would forgive every delay. They trusted that your connection would survive neglect simply because it felt spiritually strong. But even sacred connections require honesty. Even deep love can grow tired of standing alone. And when they finally understood this, shame settled over them, not the shame of being unworthy of love, but the shame of realizing they had wounded the very person who had seen goodness in them when they could not see it in themselves. There is more, and this is where the letter becomes difficult. Your soulmate revealed that the distance between you was never caused by a lack of feeling. It was caused by the intensity of it. They had known attraction before. They had known companionship, comfort, and temporary excitement. But what they felt with you carried a different force. You saw beyond the version they showed the world. You noticed what they tried to conceal. Around you, they could not remain emotionally untouched, and that frightened them because true love was asking them to become honest, not only with you, but with themselves. They had built an identity around being strong, independent, and unaffected. They learned to leave before they could be left. They learned to withdraw before anyone could discover how deeply they needed reassurance. They called this protection, but it was fear wearing armor. Then you entered their life, and the armor began to crack. Your kindness did not demand that they perform. Your presence made them feel safe enough to imagine a future, and that possibility frightened them more than loneliness ever had. Loneliness was familiar. Love was not. So they sabotaged moments that could have brought you closer. They delayed conversations. They acted uncertain when their heart was certain. They focused on small complications because admitting the larger truth felt dangerous. They told themselves the timing was wrong, that life was too complicated, that they needed to become better before choosing you. Some of those concerns were real, but they also used them as hiding places. The truth was that they feared being fully known. They feared that one day you would see their wounds, their mistakes, their unfinished healing, and decide they were not the person you believed them to be. What they did not understand was that you had already seen more than they realized. You sensed their fear beneath their distance. You recognized the tenderness beneath their guarded words. You were not asking for perfection. You were asking for truth. But instead of trusting your heart, they trusted the voices of old pain. They listened to memories that told them love always changes, closeness always becomes dangerous, and promises always end in disappointment. They treated you as though you were responsible for wounds you did not create. In the letter, they confessed something they had never said before. There was one particular night when they almost told you everything. They had rehearsed the conversation in their mind. They had decided to admit that their feelings were deeper than they had allowed you to see. They imagined your reaction, your silence, perhaps even your relief. But when the moment came, they looked at you and became overwhelmed by the possibility that your answer could change their life. So instead of speaking, they turned the conversation toward something ordinary. You may remember that moment. You may remember sensing that they wanted to say more. You may remember the strange pause, the softness in their eyes, the sudden change in their voice. Your intuition was right. They were standing at the edge of confession, and fear pulled them backward. They have regretted that moment more times than you know. Not because everything would have become perfect if they had spoken, but because honesty would have given both of you a real choice. Their silence stole that choice. It left you interpreting shadows while they carried a truth they refused to reveal. And now, in this final letter, they admitted that the greatest pain was not losing control. It was realizing they may have lost the person who made them want to stop running. Still, they continued writing. Their tears fell not because they wanted pity, but because the page would not allow them to escape themselves. They wrote about the small things they remembered. A phrase you used, the way your expression changed when you were trying not to show hurt, the calmness you brought into conversations, and the way your energy lingered after you were gone. They remembered details you assumed they had forgotten. They noticed more than they ever admitted. The truth is that your presence became woven into their inner world. Even when they appeared distant, they were carrying pieces of you everywhere. But one sentence in the letter holds a deeper sorrow. They wrote, "I made you feel replaceable when, in truth, no one has ever reached the part of me that you reached." Those words were not written easily. They came after a long pause, because your soulmate knew how their actions must have looked. You saw them continue with life. You saw them appear normal. Perhaps you wondered whether another person had taken your place, whether someone else had received the certainty you had been denied. Yet the letter reveals that their outward movement was not emotional freedom. It was an attempt to prove to themselves that they could move forward without facing what they felt. They tried to replace intensity with distraction. They surrounded themselves with noise. They stayed busy so they would not have to hear the truth repeating inside them. But comparison followed them. In conversations with others, they noticed the absence of the understanding they had shared with you. In moments of joy, they felt a strange emptiness because a part of them wanted to tell you. When life became difficult, your name was still the first one their heart remembered. They may not have contacted you, but emotionally, they never stopped turning in your direction. This does not erase the pain they caused. Heaven is not asking you to ignore your wounds simply because they suffered too. Love does not require you to pretend that silence was harmless. Your soulmate understands this now. In the letter, they did not demand forgiveness. They did not ask you to forget. Instead, they wrote, "I know regret does not rebuild what fear damaged." That sentence reveals a change within them. For the first time, they are no longer using their pain to excuse their behavior. They are taking responsibility for what their hesitation created. And yet, there is something hidden behind this responsibility. Something happened recently that forced them to see the possibility of truly losing you. It may have been a conversation, a dream, a sign, or the simple realization that your energy was no longer reaching for them in the same way. They felt a shift. The emotional thread they had taken for granted suddenly seemed quieter. They became aware that you were learning to live without the answers they had withheld. And that awareness brought panic. Not the selfish panic of losing attention, but the soul-deep fear of realizing that your chapter in their life could close before they ever told you what it meant. They began to imagine your future without them. They saw you laughing with someone who did not make you question your worth. They imagined you receiving the consistency they had failed to offer. They pictured another person listening when you spoke, choosing you openly, and protecting the heart they had left uncertain. The image did not awaken jealousy alone. It awakened truth. They realized they did not want to possess you, they wanted to become worthy of standing beside you. But they also knew that transformation could not be promised in a letter. It would have to be proven through action. This is why they called it their final letter. Not because their love had ended, but because they could no longer keep sending fragments, signals, and half-spoken truths. They knew they had reached the end of the version of themselves that communicated through confusion. This letter was meant to contain everything they had avoided. It was either going to become the first honest step toward you or the final respectful release of a love they had been too afraid to protect. They wrote, "I will not ask you to wait for me. I have already asked too much of your heart without saying the words." Then they admitted something even more painful. They had secretly hoped you would remain emotionally available while they figured themselves out. They had wanted the comfort of knowing you cared without carrying the responsibility of choosing you fully. They now understood how unfair that was. Love cannot be placed on a shelf and expected to remain untouched. Hearts change when they are left alone too long. Hope becomes tired. Even devotion learns how to let go. As they wrote these words, they began to confront the possibility that your healing might require distance from them. This broke something open inside them. They had always imagined healing as the path that would bring you back together, but now they understood that true love must also honor the path that brings you peace, even if that peace does not include them. That realization is what made the letter heartbreaking. For once, they were willing to love you without controlling the outcome. But do not mistake surrender for absence of hope. Beneath every apology, there was still a quiet prayer. They wrote, "If there is any place left in your heart where the truth can reach you, let this reach it." They were not asking for immediate reconciliation. They were asking you to believe that what existed between you was real, even though they handled it poorly. They wanted you to know that your love was not wasted. It awakened parts of them they had kept asleep for years. It showed them the difference between being desired and being understood. It taught them that intimacy is not someone entering your life, it is someone entering the places within you that you have kept hidden, and choosing gentleness there. Your soulmate also confessed that they had spoken about you to someone they trusted. This conversation occurred after they began writing but before the letter was completed. They needed to hear their own truth outside the privacy of their mind. At first, they described the situation carefully, leaving out the depth of their feelings. But the person listening saw through them. They asked a single question: are you afraid of losing them, or are you afraid of admitting you already love them? Your soulmate could not answer immediately. Their silence became the answer. That question followed them back to the letter. They wrote it at the top of a new page and stared at it. Then, beneath it, they finally wrote the words they had avoided. I love you. Not, I cared. Not, I miss what we had. Not, I think about you. They wrote, I love you, and I have loved you through every moment I pretended I was uncertain. Those words changed the entire letter. Everything before them had been explanation. Everything after them became confession. They admitted they loved you in your strength, but also in the moments you doubted yourself. They loved the way you tried to understand others even when you were hurting. They loved how deeply you felt, although that depth sometimes frightened them because it required honesty in return. They loved the future they imagined with you, even while telling themselves not to imagine it. They loved you when they were close, and they loved you when they created distance. But they now understood that hidden love can still cause visible pain. The letter continued into the early hours. Outside, the world was quiet, but inside them, years of emotional resistance were collapsing. They remembered every opportunity they had to reassure you and did not. They remembered when you needed clarity and they gave you mixed signals. They remembered the moment your energy changed, when you became less willing to reach first. At the time, they told themselves you were losing interest. Now they understand you were protecting what remained of your heart. There is a sentence near the end of the letter that may hurt you most deeply. They wrote, you were not difficult to love. I was difficult to reach. For too long, you carried questions about your worth. You wondered whether you asked for too much when you asked for communication, consistency, and truth. You questioned whether your sensitivity made you impossible to understand. But the letter reveals that the problem was never the depth of your heart. The problem was that your soulmate wanted to receive deep love while remaining hidden in shallow safety. Heaven needs you to hear this clearly: you were not too much. You were simply asking someone who was emotionally afraid to meet you where love becomes real. Your needs were not burdens. Your honesty was not weakness. Your desire for clarity was not impatience. You were trying to build something with a person who had not yet decided whether they were willing to leave their hiding place. But something has shifted now. Not magically, not perfectly, but genuinely. The act of writing this letter forced your soulmate to look directly at what they had been avoiding. They could no longer blame timing, circumstances, or confusion. They saw that the greatest barrier between you had been their refusal to trust love. And once they saw it, they knew they had a choice: remain the same and lose you honestly, or change and approach you without guarantees. They chose to finish the letter. Yet when the final page lay before them, they hesitated again. Not because the truth had changed, but because sending it would make everything real. Until that moment, the letter belonged only to them. It was confession without consequence. They could fold it, hide it, or destroy it, and no one would know. But placing it into your hands would mean surrendering control. You could forgive them. You could reject them. You could remain silent. You could read it and decide that love was no longer enough. Their hand rested over the last line for several minutes. They had written a closing, but something about it felt incomplete. They crossed it out. Then they wrote another, tore the page, and began again. Finally, they understood that the letter could not end with an apology alone. It needed a decision. Not a dramatic promise, but something real. Something that would reveal whether this was truly a goodbye or the beginning of a different kind of courage. So they wrote one final paragraph. This is the part heaven has not yet allowed your heart to fully see, because its meaning is connected to an action they are preparing to take. They wrote about a place connected to both of you, a place where something important was once left unfinished. They mentioned a time, a promise, and one object they have kept hidden since the day everything changed. They said that if you ever received the letter, you would know where to look next. But before they could sign their name, something happened. Their phone lit up. A message appeared from someone they had not expected to hear from, and the words on that screen changed what they were about to write. Your soulmate froze. For several moments, they did not move. Then they looked back at the unfinished letter, reached for the page, and added one final sentence beneath everything they had confessed. That sentence was not an apology. It was not goodbye. It was a warning that someone else knew about the letter, and what your soulmate had written next may change everything you believed this final message was meant to say.